Good to be back. Had a nice experience, great weather, beautiful facility. Got out today and walked around a little bit. I didn't know the full dimensions of the place. I was here such a short time last year.
When David extended the invitation again, did you expect that you would actually be here today? And
no, indeed, I wanted to be here. I mean, this is important. This is part of what I do. I mean, part of getting together with the colleagues, part of trying to extend the resonance of what we do.
Do you get together much at all? I mean, did this sort of...
Well, not necessarily with the ex-prosecutors, but between The Hague, where I have the Taylor case, I see my colleagues at the ICC and Luis Moreno Campo periodically, and Fatou Bensouda, and see Serge Bremertz, and before that Carla Ponte, and Arusha has become almost our family's second home, so I'm often back there. I was back there again in July, and so my friend Hassan Jallow. And we do have a colloquium of prosecutors. There's something we've conducted 4 sessions of, first in Arusha, secondly in Sierra Leone, and then in The Hague, and most recently in Cambodia. So we do get together because there's so much of what we do that is similar, and so many of the people that we work with are have worked in one institution or another.
The group of prosecutors, international tribunal prosecutors, is a fairly small class of people, just by definition, and some of them have rotated out, and the David Cranes, the Richard Goldstones, the Louise Arbors. Do you confer with them?
Well, I see David. I've been at conferences with Louise in the past. Richard Goldstone, I frankly didn't know very well until in 2006 when I got this job. He was selected for the interview panel. Him and the Assistant Secretary General and the Under Secretary General of the UN interviewed me. And I succeeded, so I thought he must be a good guy. So, but in any case, I sought him out the next year to talk about an issue with me, and then he invited me to appear at his class at Harvard about a year ago, and then later I went to. He was teaching a class in the Netherlands over the summer, and I visited him there. But so I've gotten to know him, even though generationally he was in this job in 95, 96, really 5 or 6 years before I became involved.
In 2006, you become the chief prosecutor. At that time, Taylor had been indicted, but was
he was in the slammer. I mean, I was in Arusha when he was arrested, and I mean, sometimes we're jealous of each other's success, but I couldn't be anything but ecstatic when I got the word that he'd been arrested. It was an example where the U.S. and the current administration did the right thing. I mean, there was a lot of persuasion that went on to press the administration to do the right thing, but eventually they insisted on his arrest. The condition was that the president of Liberia asked for it, and President Obasanjo of Nigeria had always said, if a legitimately elected government of Liberia requests the surrender of Charles Taylor, we'll have to arrest him and send him back. But he never thought that would happen, because who would want this man back, the viper back in the nest? But through a variety of diplomatic efforts, that request was made, and it was and Obasanjo said he shall be arrested. But when that news got out, Taylor ran for the border, and President Bush, to his credit, who was then preparing to receive the president of Nigeria, an extremely important country, a very great African statesman, was coming to Washington and was to see the president of the United States. The president said he would not receive him if Taylor were not arrested. And as a result, he was arrested trying to run the border into Cameroon, and within a matter of extended hours, he was off to Liberia and then to Sierra Leone, arriving on 7 p.m. on a March night in 2006. coming out of the clouds, as people describe it to me, with thousands of Sierra Leoneans on the rooftops of their houses.
So they knew it was coming.
Well, they knew that he had been arrested. It was touch and go, according to my predecessor, when he went through Monrovia, because the UN wanted to do a physical examination. But if he had done that, he wouldn't have been able to fly that night, because the helicopters can't land after nightfall, which happens at about 7 p.m. in that part of Africa on the far west coast. And my predecessor insisted, no, we can examine him when he gets to Sierra Leone. Desmond, yeah. He said you have to do it, and President Sirleaf was very anxious that if he weren't arrested immediately and taken to Sierra Leone, that there could be problems in Liberia. So it happened, and he came out of the clouds in the Mi-8 helicopter and came into custody at the end of March of 2006. And in June of 2006, after great diplomatic efforts involving the Dutch government that agreed to host the trial, the ICC, that agreed to host him in country, the ICC that agreed to host the trial, the Brits, the key formula in the end was Tony Blair that agreed to accept Taylor in custody as a prisoner if he were convicted, because the Dutch wouldn't allow Taylor to remain forever in the Netherlands. They said, have a trial. We'd like to be the capital of international justice, but we don't want these people to stay here. So they had to get the Brits to agree, or some other country to agree, and with that, and with the UN resolution, he went to The Hague in June of 2006. And I came onto the job 6 months later with the obligation of making it all matter, making it possible to try the case, to present the evidence, to prove that the indictment that we presented against him was based on fact and evidence. And that's on this day in August of 2008, what we're in the process of doing.
Bring me up to speed on the trial. You've actually been, you've had witnesses?
Oh yes, no, we're deeply into the trial. We're more than half done with the prosecution case. We've been presenting evidence since January of 2008. Today we were on the 36th witness, and each of the witnesses that we're presenting is let's just say a critical witness. They're all critical, but they're all being presented because we need their testimony for the trial. And so much of the case involves the connection between him and the crime in Sierra Leone. I mean, we're alleging him responsible for 11 counts of the most serious crimes in the world, of crimes against humanity and war crimes, of murder and mutilation and rape and sexual slavery and pillage and the recruitment of child soldiers and enslavement of people for forced labor. All of these offenses and part of what we consider to be a campaign of terror against the civilian population, which was his modus operandi that he'd implemented in the Liberian War, which was, people aren't supporting you, basically you intimidate the heck out of them. I mean, you kill them, you stretch their intestines across the road as roadblocks, you put their heads on pikes, and Sierra Leone became the chopping off of limbs. You kidnap children, you kidnap them to become child soldiers because they can become such willing perpetrators of crime, get them to commit horrendous acts against their own families or communities. You basically cut that cord and then convince them that they're Rambo and superhuman, put automatic weapons in their hands, dope them up with gunpowder and cocaine, mix it together, and they go out there and commit crimes that a 13-year-old would commit a crime that a 19-year-old would never dream of committing. And so in the Sierra Leone War, we had Dr. Chop Chop, was 12 years old, became proficient in chopping off hands and other limbs. But Taylor perfected that in the Sierra Leone, in the Liberian War, in committing other offenses, acts of cannibalism even, that were done there that intimidated communities. But it was a way in which he fought the war, and a way in which he then was able to enslave people, to dig diamonds, and to obtain the resources that were used to continue the conflict, but also to profit from it. So, you know, we've got people involved in all aspects of that. People who are his political lieutenants, people who are his executioners, people who are his communicators and runners, people that were actually critical to his conduct of the war in Sierra Leone. These people were using his weapons. They were digging diamonds that he wanted to get. He couldn't afford to have doped up people running off with the diamonds and doing things that he didn't want them to do, so he had eyes and ears on the ground, and those people we identify, and some of whom are witnesses. So our case, 2/3 of our witnesses, in the end of the day, will be linkage witnesses, people who were involved with Taylor from the top to the bottom of this link between him and the rebels. But that said, it's a complex case because he didn't go to Sierra Leone.
Right.
We're not trying him for cannibalizing people in Liberia or killing scores of political opponents and their families and everything else, crimes for which Liberians will tell you in a minute he was guilty of. We're trying him for what he did next door. And his position is they were rebels, they were fighting a corrupt government. Of course, I liked him. Gave him moral support. When the world wanted him to go to the peace table, I gave him a call and said, you know, you guys got to go negotiate peace. You know, I'm not responsible for them any more than Roosevelt's responsible for Stalin. You know? I mean, it's that's basically the position. And our position of the law is that no, he was running them, but if he wasn't running them, he was at least aiding and abetting them in highly significant ways, knowing that his assistance would contribute to a campaign, not of aggression, because we're not trying aggression here like in Nuremberg. We're not trying insurrection or treason or anything like that. We've got to show that what he was aiding with clear knowledge was a campaign of atrocity, a campaign of attacking men, women, children, innocents in conflict and engaging in what we view as a war of terror. So that's the evidence we're presenting. 36 witnesses in, more than halfway in. Within 6 months we'll be concluded with the prosecution evidence. Defense is going to take 4 or 5 months. By mid-2009, by the time I'm back here, we'll have, I'm pretty confident, concluded the trial and be awaiting the judgment. It's not our only trial. We've got the trials in Freetown, which are historic and have seen the first judgments in history for the use of child soldiers, or enlistment, use of people under the age of 15 in combat, which has never been prosecuted before we did. Acts of terror, which is the kind of thing I've talked about Taylor doing, which were done by the rebels in Sierra Leone in a civil war, which has never been prosecuted. We convicted people of sexual slavery, taking women, girls away and turning them into sex slaves. We've had convictions there. And so we're prosecuting cases there, which we think are very significant, and doing it in country, in a court that involves a partnership between ourselves and the Sierra Leone population. It's as if 60% of the people working at Nuremberg on the prosecution bench were Germans. That's the way we're running this court, and I think in the process, in the long run, I think in Nuremberg, Germans, I think, have seen the great value of Nuremberg, but I think in our court, with a greater participation of nationals, we're having, I think, a more direct and immediate impact. But we'll see. You know, we like to think we're doing something that matters, and I think we are. But you know, the proof is in the future.
Did you read the book Blood Diamonds?
Yes, so sure. Sure, I've read the book, seen the movie Blood Diamonds and the theatrical book or the theatrical movie Blood Diamond, right, with the various international stars. And
what do you think? I mean, given the evidence you've been reading, and now you also have the book, and of course the dramatization in the form of the movie. Did it depict? Was that a story that helps you educate folks? I mean, you're kind of in a...
Well, we have to go out and sell our story. We have to raise money. I mean, there was not long after I was in this job, though I wasn't in New York for the presentation. We had some of the stars of the movie, and we showed it at the United Nations to ambassadors and others. We've since done that in a child soldier movie that was made in Liberia to dramatize these things. People can understand a theatrical movie better
Right.
than they can understand an indictment or
Isn't that interesting?
or a long trial, and there's some that do a very good job. I mean, even though it involved the judge's trial and not the great Nuremberg trial of Robert Jackson, Spencer Tracy, Judgment at Nuremberg was a great movie. It really gave you a real feeling of the subsequent trials and the sort of challenges they faced of convicting those individuals at the time that the Cold War was beginning. It's a fantastic way. I mean, that's the way people understand things, narrative stories. So, nothing wrong with that. I thought several things were very well presented. The horror of the attack, the taking of family members, the taking of the child soldier. I mean, the boy that's taken away. Probably the only unrealistic part of it was how easy it was to bring him back to his dad, because the rehabilitation and the re-entry takes a lot longer than son, here I am, you know, almost. It doesn't happen that easily. The bond is so deeply broken, and the child is really so desperately injured. The scene of the amputation, as horrible as it is such a typical scene in the serial memoir. The short sleeves, long sleeves, the call to, you know, go to President Kaba, the democratically elected president of Liberia that served from '96 to 2007 with a 9-month interruption when the country was controlled by a military rebel alliance. But he'd run for president in '96 saying the future is in your hands, and so the rebels were using that ironically, saying, you want hands, go to President Kaba and get them. And everybody whose hands are chopped off, and you know, there are 2,000 of them in Freetown, many of them who I know quite well now, remember the rebels saying, go to Kaba, he'll get your hands back. And he wouldn't, no one can. And so that was very well presented. You know, to some extent, you know, we always like the idea that there's good news, there's the development of the Kimberley process, the idea that you're going to be able to vet these diamonds and to make sure they're not conflict blood diamonds, and I believe in all of these in all of these processes. But you know, if I were to rewrite the movie, I'd mention the criminal justice aspect of it. I mean, I liked Hotel Rwanda better when they put up at the end that George Rutaganda, the beer distributor, the Interahamwe leader, had been convicted and sentenced to life at the Arusha Tribunal. That the Augustin Bizimungu, the somewhat ambiguous figure, if you know the movie, who works sometimes with Paul, that's constantly saying, "Don't protect these people; they're going to die anyway," and always is talking about luxury and going to Scotland and drinking Scotch whiskey and all this kind of thing. That he was arrested by the Rwanda Tribunal in 2002 and is on trial in a proceeding that will end later this year and result in a verdict next year. So that was mentioned, his charging, and that's an important part, I think, of all of this. Different things have to be done. It's never a case of just convicting individuals. A lot of other things have to happen if these crimes are going to be prevented.
Well, I think part of just when I know you talk about Hassan Jallow, Rwanda, the first thing that comes to mind when I'm talking, and this is a non-legal stuff, is think Hotel Rwanda, think perpetrators, think prosecution. You know, it's funny how they now get it, that Rwanda, you know, and what Hassan's doing is, you know, has that kind of connect. And it's the same thing with Judgment at Nuremberg. We happen to have caught up with the screenwriter, Abby Mann. And Abby Mann says, you know, clearly it was the judge's trial, but the words he put in the mouth of Spencer Tracy were words he gleaned from Jackson. He was a big Jackson fan. And really? Only a guy like John Barrett would pick it all up. But that type of thing. Has, you know, being in this role that you're in, Steve, what's it done to your life? How's it changed you?
Well, it's fulfilled me. I mean, I'm feel having spent a lot of time and a lot of efforts domestically. I was in politics. I was in law. I was a United States attorney appointed by the president, serving for 8 years. That all of this kind of work, as everyone says who's involved in these processes, and just read Chris Dodd's book on his father's letters, etc. He was saying, this is the most, Congress, Senate, all these other things. This is the most important work he ever did, and all of us who've been involved in the process see it that way. And so that's
you can identify with Kruger last night.
Yeah, no, indeed. You can all identify with these moments when you can, and you can't, pride's a deadly sin, and, we all fall short in the processes when we do these things, and there's a danger when you get involved and you go out and look at the world and you say, I'm going to bring justice, and I'm going to do this and do that and have an impact, and because these are, you're dealing with human beings very much like you, and the people you work with have enormous lessons to teach you, and that's what's been my what I've done in the process. I think that it's been very helpful for my American experience, that I've had a much more constructive relation than some have. Some others have as well, going into Africa, working with people, listening, promoting, dealing with these things, recognizing that even though I've been in Africa for 8 years, I'm not gonna be buried there. I'm going home, and there are other people that are going to live there forever, and their families, etc. That I have to listen, that I don't know it all, and that I need to find ways to like we all do, to draw in our traditions and experiences, ways that we can achieve common goals. So. That's been a very exciting experience for me, dealing in the Rwanda Tribunal with people from 90 different countries, and working through that process, and being able to succeed, and in the Sierra Leone court too, because it matters very little unless we have an impact in country and in region for the long run, not just for the short run. So it's very important. I mean, there are the other aspects. Family joined me in Arusha. Children were then 11 and 13, went through school there and graduated, went on now first year and third year, coming into second year and fourth year in university. But a great experience. The Sierra Leone court, sadly, unlike the Rwanda court, is not a family post, so your family can't come and stay with you. So we have a much harder time holding on to people in Sierra Leone. Indeed, all the time that I was chief of prosecutions, and that my friend Asim Jallo was my boss from 2003 onward, we never had a senior trial attorney that left Arusha, whereas in Freetown, people are constantly saying they've got to go. I mean, there are challenges physically, challenges particularly of separation. But my family's been to see me 3 times there since I got there a year and 8 months ago, and we're all part of the same planet, and so we can handle these separations. And indeed, if they were in Freetown, they'd say, "Oh, Dad's off to The Hague tonight for the Taylor case, or off to New York or London or whatever to raise funds." So it's it's here, there, and everywhere. But it's a great experience.
Well, you mentioned the 2 big things: raising funds and the Taylor case. You gave the opening statement on the Taylor case.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? I mean, this is a highly publicized case, and there you are, Stephen Rapp, giving the opening statement against the president of.
Well, I mean, I may have discussed it last year because that was in June of '07, and we obviously had this situation where the accused refused to come, fired his lawyer, and the judges proceeded anyway, and so we gave it just like he was there, perhaps with less drama. As a result of all of this, we had CNN broadcasting it live for an hour, etc. Middle of the night in America, or in the morning in Europe. But we were ready and laying it all out, and we've been proving it since. And as I said, there's never been an American, at least in this process, that hasn't read Jackson before they've gone in and looked at lessons, votes, approaches, etc. That to an opening statement, and it's something that I enjoy more than other parts of the process. Right. Sort of the rhetorical aspect, the chance to get literary, the chance to not to overstate your case, but to lay it out in a way that you can prove, and that will at least inform anybody watching it who can't watch the next 18 months what it's all about.
Well, do you find that you'd like to be more in the trial scene as opposed to out knocking on doors looking for funding?
Well, I mean, I was back in May for 7 days leading the testimony of Taylor's successor as president of Liberia, who I spent an enormous amount of time with, Moses Blah, who'd been he'd met him in the camps in 1989 in Libya. They'd met together and were allies. Taylor made him his adjutant of his rebel force in Libya. This is in actually 87, 88. Mm-hmm. And then he became his inspector general of his rebel force. He became his ambassador to Libya, according to his testimony, bringing suitcases of cash to Taylor from Muammar Gaddafi. And then his vice president for 3 years, and then his successor for 61 days. And I persuaded Blah to testify against Taylor and light his testimony, which was, in my view, very helpful testimony for our case, but testimony of enormous dramatic impact in Liberia. I mean, we always have this question that we're dealing with this case in Sierra Leone, and only certain Taylor facts are directly relevant to us. Some show a pattern, some show consistent conduct, but there were some aspects of what Taylor had done in Liberia or in Sierra Leone that were very important to our case. But Blah testifying against Taylor had an effect almost comparable to the Sirleaf election in terms of the development of Liberia and putting this episode behind them. Intriguingly, since then, Blah went back to Liberia and was sued by one of Taylor's supporters, one of the richest men in the country, one who's on the asset freeze list, who's allegedly having tens of millions of dollars of Taylor's ill-gotten gains. Someone who had fought the UN asset freeze, and the Liberian courts had declared the UN asset freeze, which is applicable to all 192 members of the UN, and which has been enforced in Lebanon and Libya and everywhere else, as unenforceable in Liberia. So he's been able to keep his wealth. Legislation tabled by President Sirleaf in the Liberian legislature was defeated unanimously. And so when Blah, who's a relatively poor man for someone who's been in politics, came back to Liberia, he was sued by the richest man in the country for $4.5 million for the testimony he'd given at The Hague in the Taylor case in May under my leadership, under my questioning. And what he said was pretty minor on Uri, and wasn't what Uri had said it was, but it certainly wasn't libelous. And as a matter of well-settled law and judicial processes across the world, witnesses who were testifying under oath, particularly in the case of Blah, who we subpoenaed, are immune from suit. Otherwise, people who lose suits would go out and sue the lawyers and sue the witnesses and sue everybody, forever, and harass them to death, and keep them from fighting and seeking justice in the courts. So, but that said, we were fearful of what would happen. But we're very pleased that earlier this month, we worked closely with the attorneys in Monrovia who represented Blah, but the Taylor-appointed judge in Monrovia throughout the case, finding immunity, upholding the rule of law against the richest man in the country. So, we think what we're doing is having an effect. The rule of law is being upheld, and but it's not done yet.
You guys are meeting tomorrow morning, not letting us in, and when 12 o'clock, when you emerge, what do you hope you might have accomplished?
Well, we'll see. I mean, obviously, we want to look at. I've told David, who's been out of this for 3 years, that those of us that are in the process, the ICC accepted, have some challenges that are very special. I mean, we're almost every one of these courts is now engaged in some of the most important prosecutions they've ever done, and at least in our court, we're. As we noted earlier, ours is supported by voluntary contributions, so we have to raise the money to keep going, but we also, to raise it, have a budget that basically says this year we'll spend $36 million, next year $23 million, next year $8 million, the next year $0. Yeah. We are going out of business, and we are laying off people every day. We're closing the doors. We're, I once had 4 senior trial attorneys, now I have 1. We are doing this completion strategy to basically say, we've done our work, we've tied it up, and now we'll, hope it has an impact. And that's we're the first to close, and we face very hard choices because of the budget situation. But the other courts are also facing challenges. I mean, recently. And it's up to the ICTY people, the Yugoslavia people, to talk about this. But they have a challenge now with the Russian attitude about the Yugoslavia court, and the Russians, for reasons of Slavic or Orthodox identity, have always had concerns about what they view as the targeting of the Serbian and Bosnian Serb, the Milosevic's, the Karadžić's, etc., even though the ICTY has prosecuted Croatians and Bosnians and Kosovars. And they're basically saying the Yugoslavia Tribunal needs to go out of business. 5 years ago said, well, the trials will be over in 2008. Appeals in 2010. Karadžić was just arrested. Trial won't even begin until 2009, so what's going to happen? Well, the judges have to have their terms renewed in 2009. The Russians could veto that. They could prevent that court from continuing. Just stop it in its tracks. Will that happen? We hope not. It needs to be high on the diplomatic agenda. They may fight on other things. They may decide in the end a short extension is possible, but it could become a big issue. The Rwanda Tribunal has received an extension of their judges for a year, and they need that. It's kind of a hard thing to talk about because trials go on and on and on. Why aren't you done yet? It's hard to say Karadžić should be done. He just got arrested. Hard to say that the Sierra Leone court could have finished its work in 2006, which was the original dream, when Taylor didn't come in to the door until March of 2006. So you do need time to finish these trials, and so you face these pressures, and then you also face the challenge of what happens to your institutions, its records, its judicial processes once it's ended. In the case of Nuremberg, there was an Allied occupation of a joint sort that lasted essentially till the fall of the Berlin Wall, 2 years after the death of Hess. But there was no, who enforces the sentences of these courts once they go out? Who decides whether there's new evidence that justifies a new trial? Who decides whether somebody's sentence should be commuted, etc.? These are issues that have to be dealt with. And what about the millions of pages of documents that have been developed by the court? So we have a number of issues that we're working on together about how the short-term institutions, which have had, I think, a dramatic effect on the world, as did the short-term institutions of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, and the subsequent proceedings had enormous effect, albeit only short-term in active proceedings. But we have to deal with that, and so that's some of what we'll talk about tomorrow, decide whether that should be reflected in our declaration or whether that's something we can talk about later. But it implicates the work of the Sierra Leone, the Yugoslavia, and the Rwanda court, and the Cambodia court in due course.
How interesting. Really, when you think about, you would have guessed from a congressman, your earlier days, to prosecuting a former president of head of state. I mean, this is quite an interesting ride for one Steve Rapp.
Well, it's not done. That's not. Anyway, there'll be lots of it.
Ongoing, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks for spending the time. I look forward to next year when we can bring ourselves up to speed.
We'll be back.